All right, good morning, folks. We are back. Government Operations, Military Affairs, Wednesday, March 26th, a little bit past 9:30 a.m. And we are gonna discuss H 404, an act relating to the authority over the highway of the village of Old Bennington specifically. We have the sponsor of the bill here, Representative Greer. And this was something that we had wanted to take a look at a couple of weeks ago, but scheduling prevented that. So thank you for your patience in circling back with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And it is to my understanding, and I'm looking at Tucker as I say this, that this is classified as a municipal charter, correct? Awesome. So yeah, no worries with the wait at all. I know.
We were worried. Sorry, just playing.
Oh, well, I'm happy to just kind of walk through. I know I had sent you guys a letter, I believe, on March 11th about the bill, and I can update in general some of the changes and recent developments that have happened with it. But essentially, this has been something that the Village of Old Bennington's been working on for several years, because their contract that they have right now with the people that maintain the roads and the highways is astronomically expensive. And it makes more sense in terms of, I'm assuming, the economies of scale to merge that with the town of Bennington. And so the town of Bennington agrees with it because obviously there's, a win-win in this for everyone. The village's contract would be reduced by working with the town. But similarly, the town would be able to use part of the grand list for the roads. The town would be able to collect that revenue off of the Old Bennington properties, which they're not able to currently because the Village of Old Bennington does their own tax collection for the road grand list. I had mentioned, and I think this had come to light kind of in January, February when we first started talking about this, was that, the village would need a vote on this, at least in some kind of non-binding vote. And so originally in that letter I had sent to you guys on the 11th, I'd said April 1st was going to be when that vote was held. They spoke with the Vermont League of City and Towns, and they did say that they needed to postpone it to April 22nd. So that has been officially advertised, posted in the paper, follows open meeting, I'm assuming, or whatever law exactly states that they need to do this. But they're going to be doing it, I don't believe it's Australian ballot. I believe it's, they're going to be meeting in their meeting house. And the reason I'm bringing this up was because I just wanted to get clarity on if I need to send anything back to them about how the voting needs to be done in order to ensure it meets your standards. But I believe they're doing it by secret ballot at the meeting house, or I forget if it's show of hands. It's something. I don't know. I might need to go back and double check on that for you. Would there be a preference from this committee on how to go about that?
I don't want to speak to that right now. I want to understand the mechanics a little bit better, but we'll figure it out.
Okay, yep. And then let me make sure I kind of covered everything. I mean, I think that covers the substance of it. I know that I believe there are 3 sections to that acts and resolves number 300 that we're talking about. And I believe it's just the last section, that section 3, that's necessary in order to get that repealed so that the village can move forward with merging with the town. So I think that's all I have, unless there's specific questions that I can answer.
Yeah, thank you. Anything from the table?
Straightforward. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Representative. We'll shift over to council now and just get the insight from our attorney.
Also, did I identify myself for the record? Will Greer, Bennington. There we go.
Thank you for closing that loop, Representative.
Morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. Quick turnaround there. You have in front of you H 404 as introduced. And as Representative Greer pointed out, the bill really has one operative section, which repeals Section 3 of 1959 Acts and Resolves number 300. Having explained that, talk a little bit about the mechanics and the context here. Representative Greer was correct that this is in effect a charter. And to bring you back in time to the procedures that the General Assembly used to follow, there was no Title 24 appendix where all of the charters were codified. The Municipal Corporation Acts were passed as session law. They were very difficult to track over time. For some municipalities, you had overlapping acts that conflicted with each other. There was a period of time in the early 1980s where the General Assembly was essentially just permitting municipalities to alter charters by local referendum, and the General Assembly was approving whatever was approved at the local level without actually putting the text of the amendment in the act. The act would just say local referendum number whatever is approved. So this all kind of came to a head when no one in the broader legal community or the public had a really good grasp on what the text of the charters were. So there was an effort that took place over many years and was spearheaded by Legislative Counsel Michael Chernick, who was directed by an act of the General Assembly to work with all of the chartered municipalities in the state to codify whatever the official collection of legislative acts relating to each municipality was. And in a drawer in my desk, I have inherited these giant binders of the acts and resolves related to a handful of municipalities that maybe non-cooperative municipalities is the kindest way to describe this, that did not submit or could not produce all of the local referenda and the acts and resolves that are related to what would be their codified municipal charter. And there is a nice folder in there just for Old Bennington, which is why instead of amending a Title 24 appendix codified charter, you are continuing the General Assembly's long-held tradition of amending Old Bennington's municipal charter through session law. And you are repealing Section 3 of that act, which expressly prohibited the village from using the town's highway commissioner, and also from the town highway commissioner having any authority over the village roads. As the representative pointed out, there were 3 sections in this act. The first 2 sections dealt with the village's authority to assess highway taxes for purposes of village roads, and a section about the collection and use of those taxes. The policy decision that's made within H404 as introduced was to repeal just the section of that act that prohibited the town highway commissioner from having authority over village highways. However, depending on the scope of whatever this vote is going to be at the village, or the will and whim of the General Assembly, you could repeal the entire act and just revert the village to the general laws that govern all of the other villages in the state, except those that are chartered and have specific authority.
Representative Pistol.
Does the village currently have its own road commissioners?
That is a question I don't know the answer to.
I could get back to you.
Okay.
I believe they do Sandy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Was the trustees of the village, or if they actually had their own road commissioner?
Interestingly, just to kind of ground you in the text of what was in 1959 Act 300 in Section 3, not only did it prohibit the town highway commissioner from having authority over highway, streets, lanes, or sidewalks in the village, it expressly prohibited the voters of the village from being able to vote for road commissioners in the town.
According to the website, they do.
San Marco, probably not pronouncing that name correctly, but yes, they do.
I understand exactly what they're asking here, but I just think there's like obviously some complexities that we need to figure out, but that's what testimony is for, right? So,
They need that vote, see if they even
yeah.
pass this. Before we can move forward with this again.
Was it just the opposite? When they vote?
You have the power to do whatever you would like.
I thought he was gonna say that.
There is no procedure that binds your action, especially related to municipal charters, except for the Constitution, and the Constitution does not say you have to wait for vote from the village to amend their charter, so.
It's more of a, yeah, like a situational understanding of the like temperature of the community, but yes, to council's point, that is just a process that is chosen.
To know.
Okay, so, I mean, I think we should still keep looking at this, so when we're doing agenda planning, we can figure out next steps for testimony. This conversation's come up a couple of times. Anybody have, we're a little ahead of schedule right now. Anybody have any feedback? Representative Coffin?
Oh, I'm just
Hango.
wondering, because I'm a little confused here. So the village of Old Bennington. Okay, town of Bennington. So just trying to figure out which one's taking authority of the other. The roads, this is where I'm confused.
It's the town.
The
Town.
towns are gonna take over.
Town's,
The
Okay.
village would like the town to take over.
yeah, the village wants the
Alright.
town.
The village wants the town to take over.
I apologize that I.
In essence.
Yeah, I'm a little,
Sorry.
Maybe it would be good to take a step back and talk about the relationship between towns and villages broadly.
Yeah.
Villages, this is not a derogatory term, are lesser incorporated units of government. So villages are located within towns. They have separate governing bodies. And for the most part, their authority is let's say, additional, right, within their jurisdictional boundaries. And this is always the confusing part, but the voters of the village and the residents of the village are also voters and residents of the town that they are within. So typically, what that means is that residents of a village simultaneously vote and pay taxes within the town and are subject to town ordinances. But they also vote, are subject to taxes and subject to ordinances within the village as well. So if you live in a village, you have this overlap of town and village authority. We use the term harmonized in law, but where possible, the authority of the village and the town are harmonized so that there isn't conflict. But where there is conflict between authority, if you live in the village, let's say ordinances and bylaws, for example, will control. In this case, you have this act from 1959 that expressly prohibits the voters of the village from voting for the town highway commissioner and simultaneously expressly prohibits that town officer, I think it's termed the road commissioner in the act, from having any control or supervision over village roads, sidewalks, or lanes. So the village has a completely separate government for purposes of their highways. They have apparently their own village highway commissioners. They have the authority to separately collect and use a tax for purposes of the village streets. And they apparently, at least according to 1959 Act 300, do not have authority to vote for the election of the town's road commissioner.
Okay, we got Boyden next. There you go.
I was just going back to our kind of previous conversation about process of things. I feel like with every other charter that we take up, it's already been approved, okay? Either the voters or the select board, whoever. So it may make sense to hit the pause button.
Tell me what you're saying. Okay.
Do the town voters have to weigh in on this? I think that was my question, because it's giving more responsibility to the town and more work for the town road commissioner and road crew. Yes, John Tucker.
I can maybe address both of those things at the same time. So yes, typically when we are dealing with special acts affecting one municipality, that municipality has followed 17 VSA section 2645, which is the charter amendment procedure. And it is a very granular and specific procedure that is required for any municipal corporation to propose the adoption of, amendment to, or repeal of a municipal charter for that municipality. So typically you are receiving the charter materials, the charter packet in advance of a bill being introduced, but that is not always the case. And sometimes the General Assembly recognizes particular issues with municipal charters, or sees conflict between municipal charters and another act of the General Assembly, and will supersede, repeal, alter, or amend a municipal charter without hearing from the municipality directly.
So
As far as the town and hearing from the town. That is not required under the statutory procedure for charter amendment. It is required to have votes of both municipalities when you're dealing with mergers of municipalities. There have been times in the past where the General Assembly has recognized that a charter amendment or a charter adoption is going to have an outstanding impact on another municipality, and they will essentially push pause on a bill and issue some session law directing a municipality that is going to be affected to hold a vote on the issue. That's always something you can consider whenever those issues come up in the future or here.
Uh, What is the difference, like, what's the point of having a village, like the distinction between a village and a town, if they both, it sounds like they both have the same authority, but it must not.
There's the purpose of a village can be. There's quite a few. A big one is utilities.
Okay.
Control over utilities, especially when we're dealing with extraterritorial service. Who has invested in the construction of a utility, whether that be light works, sewer works, water works? Who are the end users of the system? And how do you control voting rights about the composition of what is effectively a government corporation and an enterprise at the same time? That was the issue that drove many years of discussion about the village of Waterbury, which has been dissolved, repealed, and now exists in charter as the EFUD, the Edward Farrar Utility District. And that was about defining the voter district for a utility that used to be a village. So utilities, definitely one reason that people like villages. The ability to raise additional taxes that are dedicated for specific purposes. That is another reason. Having the opportunity to have a separate village tax that can then be dedicated only to property and areas within the jurisdictional boundaries of the village, instead of, for example, having a downtown district that is profit generating, revenue generating for the municipal corporation, and then having that kind of spread out throughout the entire municipality, forcing reinvestment essentially within a village. More control over police power matters. So, for example, we don't like the way that the village roads are being cared for, but we don't have a critical voter mass to control how the town is taking care of our roads. So we're going to gather 25 residents, which is all that you need to petition for a village. And we are going to create a village with our own board, and we are going to control how the money is taxed, collected, and used for this purpose that we are specifically concerned with. Yeah, the last one I was gonna say is there's been proposals, for example, water is sold at special rates to municipal corporations, and there have been many proposals throughout the state where, for example, where condominiums are located or mobile home parks, where they have discussed, oh, well, if we actually incorporate as a municipal corporation, a village, we can buy our water for 50% of the rate that we are currently buying it for the residents of our park, just by becoming a municipal corporation instead of, for example, a real estate investment trust corporation. That is definitely a thing.
So this, is it different than, sounds like the village rules, are they equal or like, do they, like, you know how Dylan's rule, like the state has to give authority to the municipality? It sounds like a village does not have to ask for that authority from the town. Am I understanding?
Correct. But villages under general law don't have the full menu of powers that are granted to cities and towns. And when you're working on bills within the municipal law genre, I will always point out to you what the definition of municipality is for purposes of the statute you're working in, because it could exclude incorporated villages, or it could be the entire menu of municipal corporations codified in Title I under the general definition of municipality, which is everything from your cities and towns and villages to your school districts, to your water districts, to the self-incorporated fire districts made up of 10 homeowners who don't want to be on a well system anymore. Yes, you did.
Representative
Oh, no, as you explained it then, it made me think about, I used to live in Bellas Falls, village of Bellas Falls, which is in the town of Rockingham. And the highway departments there combined, where the town took over the highway department of village of Bellas Falls, it kept both garages. So that you had in village and out, but that was more for making it more affordable for the town and the village. Get the coverage and be able to do more work in the village, I believe.
That's what this is.
So I think that's what this is asking. It's almost exactly the same as what I lived in.
Alright.
The town had to want to do it as well as the village. They wanted to take the responsibility as well.
Thank you for the opportunity to do a deep dive. It's Muni Law season. I'm getting all hyped up. This is my March Madness.
You know, I love it when you shower knowledge on us, council. Just you're soaking it up. Yeah. All right. Senator, how are you?
I'm well, how are you today?
I'm well. Please join us. Yeah,
Everybody today.
good. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, but you're here, so we figured, hey, why not 5 minutes early?
I had a little note put on my desk down in Health and Welfare that be here at 10 o'clock to present the S59.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what we got on our agenda too.
Orange County in the house. Orange County in the house, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, welcome. First time up here for you. Welcome to our abode.
Yeah.
It
was a hard time finding it.
Good. It is a public space, but yeah. A little known to some.
Have you seen the S59 bill?
We have it on our committee page. Since your first time in the room and you're a new member, we'll do a quick introduction around the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Representative Matt Byron, Chair of the committee. I represent Northwest Addison County.
Representative Lisa Hango, Franklin 5 on the northwestern Canadian border, and I am the vice chair.
Representative Lucy Boyden, Memorial 3, Cambridge and Waterville.
Sandy Pitzel, Bennington Rutland, ZMB Dorset, Tabor, Pilgrim, and Lambert.
Michael Morgan, all of Grand Isle County, which is Albert, Isle Lamont, North Hero, Grand Isle, South Hero, and West Milton.
Hooper, Martin Burlington.
Representative Coffin, Cavendish, Weathersfield, Baltimore, Windsor 2.
Catherine Stone, Burlington.
Your favorite hometown Democrat?
The hoopster. Don't even call Hoop anymore. He's the hoopster.
I'm Kate Nugent and I represent a part of South Burlington.
Hi, I'm Shay Waters Evans from Charlotte in Heinsberg.
Sounds great. Senator Larry Hart, Orange County. I harass him on a regular basis, by the way.
As do we.
Most people.
Okay. So just to let you know, there was a couple amendments that we did to S-59 at request of Senator Baruth. It basically stated that whenever a public body includes an executive session as an item on the posted meeting agenda, that the public body shall list the agenda as proposed executive session. So that was the only big amendment that we had to it. And the bill basically states that within 5 days, I believe it is, after a meeting, that it needs to be open to the public. So in other words, in the little town of Topsom that we only have like 800 people in our town. I heard you guys talk about villages. We have 3 villages in the town of Topsom, and because they all have a store, they all have a church, and they all have a post office. So they're all in the same, so at one time they were considered inlets of the town. Now they're considered villages of the town. With our new town, working with 3 Rivers out of Quechee, and we got our town plan done. So we had 3 there. But every meeting that we have the owl. I don't know, you ever heard of the owl? We have the owl, and the owl records. We send it to, the recording goes to Mrs. Clark, and Mrs. Clark puts it on to our website within 5 days. So that anybody can see what was happening. They also can come on live if they want to come on live and watch us through Zoom or through whatever they want to do. We have it that way. That started with COVID and hasn't stopped. The town has adopted that to continue with that. I'm sure that does Randolph do the same thing? Okay.
Yeah,
I think most of the towns in our area all are recorded now.
yeah, they have one.
Yeah, they're all, I think every town that we have is already in Orange County is recorded. So, the only thing I'm gonna check with, because I need to be there next Monday, is the town of West Fairleigh. I'm not sure if they are or not. So I'm gonna be there and tell them about this bill. Because they asked me to be there. It was funny, the town of West Fairleigh during the campaign, only 70 people showed up to vote. I got all 7. So is there any questions about S-59, sir?
Does anybody have any questions from the table for the presenter of the bill from the Senate? If not, we'll discuss with council and go through the mechanics.
He's all over that, so yeah. He's like top notch anyways. We won't get his head too big, but that's okay. He's great. We love having him in our committees and stuff like that. But when we did take a testimony, Tucker was one of the people on that talked to us about S-59. And then we had Mariah Collins, the executive officer of Vermont Housing Finance Agency. The sponsor of this bill was Senator Ruth Hardy. And then we had Senator Wendy Harrison, sponsor from the Wyndham District, and Cassie Polhemus, who is the executive officer of Vermont Economic Development Authority, and John Potter, the town manager down in Brattleboro, and Samantha Sheehan, the municipal policy and advocate specialty specialists from Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns. So we had a lot of people that came and talked to us about S59. And it passed through our Senate, through our government ops 500. And then the first reading went well. The second reading, my presentation went well. Second reading went well, and it passed floor of this, of the Senate with no problems. And that was a unanimous vote in the Senate.
All right.
So that was up to you guys to take a look at it, like a crossover thing. You guys, if you guys are interested in it, it's, I think you guys had your own version of it, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Last year.
Yeah, we like, yeah.
And I recall talking about the recording quite a bit last year. Recording the meetings.
We had, during the COVID, we had to do the recording. I mean, we could get together as a group of 5 select board members. I was the chairman at that point of the select board. And we could get together if we kept space, we did our thing. And we were recorded doing our agenda, doing our whole town meeting, but we were recorded. And we had a big board up there with all these people on Zoom. So we had everything that people wanted to listen in. Unfortunately, you're usually only having 8 to 10 people show up on Zoom. That was it. We did have people come to the meeting, but they sat in different spots. They just were, they were all worried about COVID. They were sitting in different spots. But we had maybe a total of 25 people show up between Zoom and whatever. But I know that some of the municipalities now have a lot more people than what we had. But again, if there's any questions whatsoever, you guys can reach me, at Elhart. And just reach me, whatever. I can answer any questions you guys have. Now I gotta go back to Senator Lyons. She put me in a headlock if I'm late.
Well, please give Senator Lyons my best. And if you don't mind letting her know, I still want to talk to her about that thing. That would be great.
What thing is that?
She'll know.
Secret messages.
Yeah, we just had H69 and H266 come to us. So we're working on that right now. The certificate of needs and then the was it 304B?
Yeah.
Yep, so we just got those. They're downstairs right now. I believe that they're going over that right now. So, but she said, go, you got a job to do. So, well, thank you so much for having me up here. And again, if you have a copy, and if you need a section of the amendment, which was just what I read to you, that Senator Baruth had requested that we amend it, just the wording in that agenda. Because he didn't like the idea that it wasn't warned to the people about executive sessions. And executive sessions, are you familiar with executive sessions?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, if you make a motion to go into executive session to discuss this, you need to let the body know that you're going to executive sessions to discuss finance, personnel, municipality issues, or something like that. So you need to let them know that you're going in to talk about that. And then when you come out, somebody makes a motion to come out of executive session, and then you go back into your meeting and you explain to them that you discussed this. And if it's something that was a personnel issue, you can just say, hey, we had a personnel issue that we're discussing, but we're going to go into it further details and we'll have more results for you in the next meeting, or something like that. You can, as long as you're open with them that you guys talked about something. So that's what executive session does. So, after being on the select board chair for 9 years, I kind of got I stepped down and gave it the position to a young lawyer. so that's a friend of mine. Anyways, well, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, Senator. Thank you for the time.
And I do delegate you all to harass him as much as possible.
Never.
Don't worry, they're on top.
He's a great friend. So I'll see you Monday, I believe, Monday morning. Yeah. Oh, at that.
Whatever it is. Oh, yeah, the downstairs.
Yeah, that breakfast, the breakfast thing.
After milking, I'll see you.
That's college in Vermont now, I believe. So,
Not State University.
Brand. Yeah. Okay, I'll see if I can find my way out of this maze.
Bang on the left, go down the stairs, you're home free.
true, that's the default.
Council. Tell I got good students.
Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. You have in front of you S59 as passed by Senate. Just want to emphasize that so that we're all working from the as passed by Senate version.
Interesting. Sorry that you said that because I don't think I'm on the right version.
It is posted to the.
It says as recommended on ours. That's it? Okay.
That's at the very top.
Okay, thank you.
Right in the first line, that's passed.
Before I jump into the contents of S59, what is the committee's comfort level with the open meeting law generally? Should I do a kind of high level overview of the open meeting law, some of its requirements, and then maybe what the General Assembly passed last year in Act 133? All of that will be underpinning for what S59 is doing here.
I think it's important to have that as context.
Okay, so broadly, the open meeting law grants the public access to meetings of public bodies. Public bodies defined as essentially any consensus building body of the state or local government. There's an exhaustive list in 1 VSA section 310 in the definition of what a public body is. Think of any board, committee, commission, subcommittee of the state or any political subdivision of the state. So this doesn't apply to individual officers, but it does apply to, for example, a study committee or a board, such as the Board of Nursing Licensure. Meetings is also defined for purposes of the open meeting law, but broadly you can think of this as any gathering of a quorum or more of the members of a public body to conduct the business of the public body, essentially to discuss any matters that are under the control jurisdiction of the public body itself. There are requirements for noticing, posting agendas, stating the time and place of regular, special, or emergency meetings, procedures governing electronic meeting, requirements for public access and the opportunity, for example, for public comment that are scattered all through 1 VSA section 312, which is the big operative section of the subchapter that is the open meeting law, which is the short title we give that subchapter. 1 VSA section 312 is the section that gets most of the attention in the open meeting law, and that we will talk about in the context of S59. Last session, Act 133 was passed by the General Assembly, and the major update within Act 133 was the requirement that all public bodies of the state hold hybrid meetings. And I emphasized a few things there. We're talking about state public bodies, not local public bodies, and a hybrid requirement, which means having both a designated physical meeting location that meets the requirements of 1 VSA section 312 and the public accommodation statutes in Title IX, and a designated electronic meeting platform that meets the requirements of 1 VSA section 312 for direct access of the public, access by telephone, and essentially what would be considered now a live streaming function, right? You are very familiar with this because all of these requirements were based off of what the General Assembly does for all of its committee meetings and the chambers. Within that, local public bodies were given some express requirements. The most notable is around requests for access to meetings. So there's no hybrid meeting requirement that is applied to the public bodies of municipalities, but there is a requirement that they respond to requests for access. That is from members of the public body itself or from members of the public. They can request, for example, that a meeting at the local level that was going to be held only in a physical meeting location also be available electronically, or alternatively, that an exclusively electronic meeting also have a designated physical meeting location. There's also a clause built in there that allows someone to simply ask for access by telephone.
Forgotten, was there a deadline with that? Because at one point we talked about 2 business days prior that the request needed to be made, and I can't remember what we landed on.
Yeah, there is a requirement that the request come in within a specific deadline before the meeting is to be held. Further, there's an out for the municipalities, which is that they can assert that the request causes an undue burden, which is defined in 1 VSA section 310 and is further amended in S59. And I'll talk about how the standard shifts a little bit within the definition of undue burden. But essentially, if it's going to be too burdensome and costly for the municipality to grant the request, they have authority to deny it and say, this is an undue burden. There's one more major shift from Act 133 last year, which is that the General Assembly created a specific subset of public bodies called advisory bodies. Advisory bodies was defined for purposes of granting exemptions and exceptions to provisions of the open meeting law, specifically the requirement for designated physical meeting locations. Advisory bodies were defined as public bodies that do not have control or jurisdiction over 4 essential matters: legislative, quasi-judicial, taxation, and budgetary matters. So if you are a public body that doesn't have any control or jurisdiction over those 4 things, you exist purely in an advisory capacity. You're not decision-making over police powers, right? Legislative powers, or the taxes that are to be set within your jurisdiction. You are not a quasi-judicial body that is reviewing contested cases, and you do not approve a budget. You have no control over a budget. Then you're an advisory body and you can hold purely electronic meetings, which is really what that definition was driving at, allowing some of these bodies that don't have a lot of power or control to meet electronically, to reduce burden and expense, make it easier for members of those bodies to be able to attend meetings. Through that process, and potentially inadvertently, another term was added to the open meeting law that S59 addresses, which was the inclusion of the term non-advisory public bodies. And that was to help distinguish between this new exception language, advisory, and basically all of the other public bodies in the state. The issue that has come up since then is that ended up being very confusing, because some of those public bodies that have control over those matters also can be advisory. They're not non-advisory, they're just public bodies. Hopefully that tees up what S59 is doing adequately, and I'll walk you through. If there are any questions, feel free to interrupt me. It's my great burden and curse that many of the open meeting law provisions are like tattooed on my back and permanently burned into my brain. I see them in my dreams. So I should be able to respond to your questions as we move through this. Okay, it's right below Dylan's rule back there. As it creates, so may it destroy.
So is it all like, is it enumerated with Romanettes or alpha?
Absolutely with Romanettes. Yeah,
That's my preferred.
we're in the 6th level of subdivision here. Taking a look as S59 as passed by the Senate. Section 1 amends the definition section of the open meeting law 1 VSA section 310 to amend the definition of undue hardship. After the amendment, the undue hardship language, an action requiring significant difficulty or expense, new language added here, to the unit of government to which a public body belongs. Right? So we're talking about the difficulty or expense not to the public body itself. So not the Parks Board at the local municipality, but to the municipality. Right? This is about the ability of the unit of government to support whatever the request is, not the individual public body. Considered in light of factors, including, so this means including but not limited to, this is directory, not mandatory language. The overall size of the entity, existing language, striking the word sufficient here, and I will tell you why in a moment, and replacing it with the availability of necessary personnel and staff. So there is a difference in the standard between what is sufficient and what is necessary. Here, what the public body is being directed to evaluate is whether they can provide necessary staff, not sufficient. Sufficient is a higher standard in this context. The entity's available resources, instead of specifically their budget, like casting a wider net. So we're not just looking at the dollars you have, but what your resources are to accommodate the request and the costs associated with compliance. These amendments are based on trying to bring this closer to the standards that are applied in other accommodation settings. And one of the things, as the House and the Senate passed this bill back and forth, Act 133 back and forth last year, is that the discussion on the record in Senate GovOps was that they did not want to mirror accommodation things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, that they wanted to just have a simple request denial system that didn't take undue hardship into consideration. And that was because they didn't want this to be interpreted as strictly applying to instances where someone needs an accommodation because of, for example, ADA request. They wanted this to be separate. But as the bill came back, it had an undue hardship definition. And now the desire is, well, if it's going to be there, it shouldn't be in this middling, confusing territory. It should be as close as possible to ADA. Okay. In section 2, this amends 1 VSA section 312, and there will be a few instances of amendment in here. The first couple that you'll notice, moving all the way into subdivision 3A, this strikes the use of the term non-advisory. As discussed earlier, this isn't defined and was causing some confusion about who qualified as a non-advisory versus just all public bodies of the state. Subdivision 3, if you're looking at it, this is the hybrid requirement. S59 as passed by the Senate as a new subdivision capital B, which grants an exception to the hybrid meeting requirement for site inspections and field visits. So the hybrid requirement shall not apply to gatherings of a public body for purposes of a site inspection or a field visit. So this alleviates any possible interpretation that a public body, when going to a field visit or a site inspection, is supposed to be carrying around a GoPro.
Yeah, basically like live streaming it on social media. Yes, Representative Rango.
I thought we had that in Act 133. Did it get taken out at the end? Because we definitely had this.
It had been heavily discussed.
As I went back through the bill and all of its various forms, this wasn't included as it passed out of Senate government operations initially. It was very heavily discussed, especially in the Senate. And I think the assumption was that it was in the bill, but it in fact was not.
No, and I heard a lot of feedback from boards and quasi-government structures, et cetera, that had to navigate this over the last year, and there was definitely a degree of perceived barriers and frustration. So
Moving through subdivision 5, these are all technical corrections, cleaning up the language for readability. All the strikeouts you see were clauses that were attached to cross references, but that ultimately just made the grammar a little bit difficult to read. So that's struck. Subdivision 6, there is a discrete change here, and it is striking 3 words. So subdivision 6 relates to the posting of meeting recordings by local public bodies. This is what Senator Hart was alluding to. And the language at the end of subdivision 6A required that these be posted in a designated electronic location for a minimum of 30 days following the approval and posting of the official minutes. And there were some qualms with this language because elsewhere in the open meeting law, there is no requirement that minutes be approved. And further, there is no distinction between official and unofficial minutes. So it strikes approval and posting of official struck through minutes. This will now just tie it directly to the posting of minutes requirement. Minutes are posted within 5 days after the meeting is held.
I remember talking about that a lot last year too.
Yes, and this was discussed in Senate GovOps in the context of S59 and going back and looking at some of the testimony. This specific language around approval and posting of official minutes was targeting some initial debate and confusion about when the 30-day requirement is triggered. And there was lots of testimony about, well, we post draft minutes within 5 days, but then the public body comes back to approve the draft minutes and then they're official. So to give municipalities more time before the recording had to be posted, the policy choice in the Senate was to use language that would make it clear that this is after whatever the final version of the minutes posted is, but going back. Taking it back. You've got 5 days to post minutes and you have to post for 30 days. Okay. Moving into, we're still in section 312, but we're going to go to subsection D. So if you're with me, there's a new subdivision 3 being added here. And for context, subsection D of 1 VSA 312 deals with the posting of meeting agendas. So at least 48 hours prior to a regular meeting and 24 hours prior to a special meeting, a meeting agenda shall be requirements for posting and where it must be posted. And then in this new subdivision 3 language, a meeting agenda shall contain sufficient details concerning the specific matters to be discussed by the public body. So that first sentence requires a sufficient level of detail, essentially that those who are attending will understand what is going to be discussed at the meeting. The example that the chair of Senate GovOps brought up during meetings on this bill multiple times was the agenda just can't say that the matter to be discussed is town road.
yeah,
I have a question.
Representative Hango.
Thank you. Does this also apply to school board meetings, which I assume it does, but we had made a carve out in one of our statutes last year to exclude school boards. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So like if a school board agenda says personnel is not a good example. Buildings update, that's not going to be sufficient anymore.
So this is a great question, and this was one of the first questions that Senator Baruth asked during some inquiry on the floor about this bill. There is no definition of what sufficient details are. There's no case law to rely on to say what sufficient detail would be. This does give some teeth for an aggrieved member of the public to file a grievance with the public body to say you have violated the open meeting law because you have not included sufficient detail on the meeting agenda, which would automatically trigger a requirement under 1 VSA section 314 for the public body to hold a hearing on the grievance within 10 days.
This sounds incredibly bureaucratic and time consuming. I'm not sure how I feel about this because I can see a lot of grievances being filed as agendas are currently written.
Now, this is the interesting part, is that under 1 VSA section 314, curing an open meeting law violation, there's only 3 bases that a public body can be compelled to cure the open meeting law violation on, and none of them relate to agendas. It is also worth noting that if details on an agenda are insufficient, it is something that can be brought up at the meeting. Why? Because one of these subdivisions that is not included here expressly states that an agenda can be amended as the first item at the meeting, and that any details within the agenda can be amended at any point during the meeting. So the public body does have plenty of opportunities during the actual meeting that has been warned and noticed to update that agenda so that it is perhaps a little more specific. And then if there is a challenge that triggers that meeting to review a grievance within 10 days, there's actually no basis for curing that violation.
Just to follow up on that, I'm aware that public bodies can do that, but often the agenda is like a canned thing that rolls over from month to month or meeting to meeting, and it's got the same agenda items on it, and they'll just throw in their reports at the last minute. And it's not really publicized ahead of time. Those reports are not, they're discussed at the meeting. So I think it would have to entail a clerk continually updating the minutes as the meeting is happening in real time. Would that suffice under this law?
Minutes separate from the agenda, but the public body itself could update the agenda as they go along.
I meant agenda, not minutes. I'm sorry.
The open meeting law is so it's a labyrinth.
Great, thank you.
Rep. Nugent, I just want to be conscious of time too. We're going to have plenty of time to work on this bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
If there's no like requirement to cure that violation, that like undermine this idea.
It gives it very little teeth. This is thumbs. It does give a statutory basis for a member of the public to put the public body on notice. And even if there's no basis for curing, the requirement to hold the hearing to determine the grievance is itself something that most public bodies want to avoid. And the reason for that is that 10-day turnaround time is very frequently sooner than what the next regular meeting is going to be. So suddenly holding an extra meeting just to make a determination based on a complaint that your agenda was not detailed enough. And I would assume most public bodies would not want to be holding those sort of grievance hearings more than once, let's say, when it might be easier to say the name of the road that is under consideration. Proceeding into section, there's one more piece at the end of subdivision 3, which Senator Hart informed you about. This requires that for any meeting that may include an executive session, that the public body, or that includes a proposed executive session, that the agenda include the express statement proposed executive session. This is only for those meetings where the public body knows in advance that there is going to be an executive session. It is part of the plan for the meeting, and they are including that in the agenda to let the public know at this time, we are going to hold an executive session. And the requirement here is very nuanced. It is just that is the way that they must describe it in the agenda. Those 3 words, proposed executive session. Moving into the executive session amendments in section 3. The first is very discreet, but does have a substantive impact on procedure. So in subsection A, right in that first clause, it requires that before a public body can conclude an executive session, they have to hold an affirmative vote to conclude in the same manner and in the same proportion as the vote to enter executive session. So before they can close the executive session and go back to the meeting, public portion of the meeting, they have to actually hold a vote. So that's what that or conclude clause does at the beginning. There's conforming amendments throughout subsection A. The last thing to note for you is the addition of subdivision 11, which adds a new basis for entering executive session. And that is to discuss information relating to the interest rates for publicly financed loans. So this will allow public bodies to go into executive session to discuss those interest rates. The act is set to take effect on passage. That is to make these updates and tools available as soon as possible.
Go.
Just a quick question, the concluding of an executive session by vote, would that vote happen in the executive session or once they come out of it and are back in the public view?
By necessity, it would have to happen in the executive session.
I thought.
They couldn't leave and go back to the public portion without holding the vote.
They have to announce the vote count to the public when they get back on public. view.
That's not expressly required here.
I wonder, like, how do you police that? That they voted to come out of executive session? Okay, just a thought.
Questions for later when we
Yeah.
dig into this. Yep.
Thanks.
Who goes?
Thank you, council.
Thank you all.
All right. And we went from ahead of schedule to slightly behind. Senator, how are you?
Excellent.
Well, it was just me just like thinking out loud, open commentary, I'm editorializing today. Welcome. Yeah, we'll shift gears over to 23. An act relating to the use of synthetic media in elections.
I just caught the end of the exemplary performance by Legislative Council. And I can answer any questions that you might have had on the open meeting piece as well. One of them came from someone who just said on the agenda, it just says Main Street. Well, what does that mean? Are you going to repave it? Are you painting it? Are you digging it up? It might be helpful for people who might want to attend if there's just a little bit more information about what Main Street is. The executive session, we've for years had a vote required to go into it, but never to come out of it. And it just seemed like bookends, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to vote again when you're in the executive session to come out of it and then go back into public session. So those are the kind of the reasons that we took up what we did. But I'm not here to talk about that. For the record, Senator Collimore from the Rutland District. We're going to look at S23, I believe, which is the synthetic media bill. Many of you, no doubt, can remember in the recently concluded general election, actually it was in the primary in January of 2024, the so-called deep fake robocalls featuring, at the time it appeared to be President Biden, urging voters not to vote in New Hampshire's primary. This was the impetus for a lot of the bills that were taken up countrywide to address what's called synthetic media. And that's what the Senate Government Operations Committee did. And we took, hours and hours of testimony on this, and I think found a pretty good path through it. I'm going to say 5 or 6 weeks worth of testimony. So S23 would require a person, when publishing or distributing media that has been manipulated using digital technology, and intending to injure the reputation of a political candidate or influence the outcome of an election to include a specific disclosure in the media. I can sort of presuppose there might be a question, why didn't you just ban it? Legislative counsel, Rick Sagel is here with me, cautioned us that if we did, the likelihood of it coming into a court would be greatly increased. So we took the path of making sure that there was a disclosure rather than trying to ban it. I believe there are now 21 states that have passed similar legislation. Some of them, I believe two, California and I think Minnesota, banned it. And in California, it's been a court case and no resolution to my knowledge has been arrived at yet. It was interesting in the other one in Mexico or in Minnesota, the answer and what it was Colorado prohibits deepfakes of candidates 60 days. Well, that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah, here it is here. So in Minnesota, a state rep who had posted deepfakes of Vice President Harris on social media filed a lawsuit challenging the state's election deepfake bill, citing violations of her First Amendment rights. The case was overshadowed by accusations that a misinformation expert submitted an affidavit in defense of the bill, which was written by artificial intelligence. So it sort of came around. Anyway, for a lot of reasons, the Senate Government Operations Committee decided not to proceed in a banning fashion, but rather to require disclosure. So there are only 4 sections. Section 2031 defines 2 terms that we use throughout the bill. Deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media, defined as media creating a misrepresentation of an individual with the intent to injure the reputation of a candidate, to influence the outcome of an election, or to otherwise deceive a voter in a manner that appears to a reasonable person to be an authentic recording of an individual saying or doing something that did not occur, or to deceive in a manner that provides a reasonable person with a fundamentally different understanding of the speech or conduct compared to an unaltered and original version of the media. So for candidates, this would include someone using IA, for instance, Representative Morgan, to make him say something he probably would never say in a million years. And up until this point, it's been fine to do that. Now, if it's a visual thing, we require a disclosure, the so-called crawl that says this has been manipulated by artificial intelligence. If it's an audio recording, there has to be a recording that indicates the same thing. Synthetic media is defined as an image, audio recording, or video recording of an individual's appearance, speech, or conduct that's been created or intentionally manipulated. Section 2032 sets forth the disclosure required when publishing a synthetic media message within 90 days of an election. Yes, that includes primary election, general election, and town meeting day elections. Because we have a town meeting, and this bill will include issue-oriented questions. So a town budget, which comes up on town meeting, or if your municipality has a board of aldermen or board of selectmen, someone could make a misleading statement about a candidate or an issue. And if they do, they have to identify it as such. And so we went around and around on this. The bill provides a few exemptions. Radio, television broadcasting stations, websites, streaming platforms, and mobile applications that broadcast deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media are exempt from the bill's requirements if they acknowledge through their own disclosures that there are questions about the authenticity of the media, or they are paid to broadcast it, or are required by federal law to broadcast the ads. I spent many years in radio, and the FCC, which is the controlling entity of the Federal Communications Commission, doesn't allow radio stations to refuse, well, let me put it another way. If they are going to accept political ads, they have to accept all political ads. They can't pick and choose. They can choose to do none, but in the current climate, the economic climate of broadcasting, it's not very healthy right now. They're looking for every possible way to make money through advertising. So most of them accept political ads. And if you're going to do that, you have to accept everybody. So that's why we carved that one out, because the FCC requires them to do that, and they don't really have any choice about it. A website, newspaper, or magazine is exempt if, again, the publication clearly states that the deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media does not accurately represent the speech or conduct of the represented individual. And parody is another one that is exempt. A person that produces synthetic media constituting parody is exempt from the bill, as are cell phone companies, internet service providers, and websites that allow users to post content on its site. So, I don't know, good example, Saturday Night Live, if somebody on there is impersonating President Trump or something else, it's pretty clear that it's done as a parody, and that would be exempt. Section 2033 sets forth the penalties for violations of the bill. A person is fined not more than $1,000 for an intentional violation unless it's done knowingly and intentionally with intent to cause violence or bodily harm, in which case the maximum penalty is increased to $5,000 and the fines go up higher for repeat offenders. A candidate who's harmed by deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media can request that the court place an injunction on the publication of such media. And then finally, section 2041 as the ability of a state's attorney or attorney general to institute an appropriate action for violations of chapter 35, which is the chapter that the bill is categorized under. The bill would take effect on passage. We voted 5-0-0 in committee to push this bill through. Again, lots of testimony taken. I can read the list if you like, but all the sort of known entities were represented. We heard from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, Public Citizen, the Secretary of State, Vermont Association of Broadcasters, et cetera, and be happy to answer any questions, but that basically is the bill.
No, we communicated in our conversations in our meeting about progress on this, and I, share the same sentiment that this needs to be addressed going into this AI landscape for sure. But questions for the senator from the table? Representative Stone.
Hi.
Hi, first of all, I can totally tell that you were in radio. Your
Well,
voice.
thank you very much.
I was wondering if y'all considered, I know an outright ban was off the table, but potentially banning material that seeks to mislead people about the time, place, and manner of voting. Like, if you thought about banning just that specific thing, since that's something you mentioned with the Biden
Yeah.
deepfakes.
And I remember seeing it
Yeah,
and thinking, gosh, I don't think Joe Biden would ever have said that. Why would he tell people not to vote kind of thing? And it was a fake. But to answer your question, and certainly Attorney Sagel's welcome to weigh in, I would view that as an attempt to influence an election. So if you mislead people in terms of saying, hey, by the way, we changed the voting date, it's really not next Tuesday, it's 2 weeks from now kind of thing, or change the time, you would be influencing the outcome of an election, in my view. I'm getting a nod from my right, so I think that's included in the bill. Yeah. Oh, come on, you must have more. On the floor, at least I had a couple.
I think we're just like getting primed right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm chewing over the exemption for radio and TV.
Okay.
And what about like over the phone? Or not phone, like on, no. Like if somebody puts out a webinar type format,
Mhm.
I was thinking Zoom, but that
Like a
doesn't
TED
work.
Talk?
Okay, I.
No,
don't
like genuinely
know.
curious,
No,
like
I'm
thinking,
trying
yeah.
to, I'm like, if somebody says I have a webinar on voting, and invites people to learn more about voting.
Mhm.
And it could be on social media. I don't know. I'm just wondering about the specificity of TV and radio, unless I'm missing something, like why other forms of electronic media are not exempted.
Well, we took great testimony from the Vermont Association of Broadcasters, and I would urge you to have Wendy Mays come in. The intent of the bill is to go after the person that manipulated whatever you're talking about by artificial intelligence, not the vehicles that wind up broadcasting it later. Again, my career spent there. So in these days, there literally are about 3 or 4 employees at radio stations. It used to be 25, 30 people, but advertising revenue has declined greatly over the last 20 years with the advent of social media. So they're not making as much money. So literally there's one person that's in a production room. Somebody sends a tape in, or those are the old days, MP3 now. And that person's job is just to load it in the system and put it so that it goes on the air. That person has no ability to determine whether that's been AI generated or not. So we didn't feel it was fair to capture really mom and pop kind of radio stations with the added expense and burden of having to defend themselves later for a $1,000 or $5,000 fine. And that's why we did it. Likewise, AT&T came in and testified that literally the wires that are used to send stuff out, that has nothing to do with the intent. They're sort of a neutral party that's just sort of doing their job. So, and you're welcome to certainly take that apart and put it back together again. But this came after a lot of testimony about who we should look at and who we shouldn't look at. And this is where we wound up. So.
And you probably found that it would be pointless to go after social media platforms.
Yeah, we didn't, for instance, have Facebook come in or anything like that. Again, if they're going to put it on, the person that put that on, if it's on their own webpage, has to disclose that it's fake in essence, or it's been manipulated.
And how do we enforce that?
Well, again, the provisions are included in that last chapter. You could have the state's attorney intervene with a fine. You could have the attorney general jump in. You can have the courts later on determine that it should be even a greater punishment. But I think, as the chairs pointed out, it isn't going to go away. This is just the beginning of the process. I mean, we're going to be, I could see in the next 20 years, more and more, I don't say controlled, but assisted by artificial intelligence at every level. Those of us that are reached a certain age may not be happy about that, but there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's with us now. It's going to be part of our landscape for quite a while. So this is just putting a toe in the water, if you will, to sort of begin the process of regulating it to some degree.
Rep. Boyden?
You talked about the timeline leading up to elections of 90 days for the general, primary, and town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any discussion about at the municipal level where like a special vote is happening? Did you get like that granular into?
We didn't take direct testimony, but my guess is because it says 90 days of an election, even a specially called for election would be included in it. And why did we pick 90? Some states went to 120, some have 60, some have 30. We landed on 90. 90 was the original proposal that came from Senator Hardy, who first introduced the bill. We just didn't monkey with it. You could change that to anything you want, I guess. It's just to sort of capture every kind of possibility that we could foresee. You can dive more deeply into this, certainly, than the Senate does, and that's the advantage of House committees is you get waist deep where we can only get knee deep in something. And, usually the result is pretty positive between the two chambers. We get to a place where we have pretty good legislation.
I do want to get to council on this, and we do have an amendment in 9 minutes.
Okay, quick question. Did you hear from the state's attorney or the attorney general's office? I didn't hear that in your list
Let me
of.
see if I have that.
I have the witness.
Okay.
Secretary of State.
Yep, attorney general's office.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Oh, thank you.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this a lot more as the session continues, because this is something we're very, at least myself and a few others I've spoken with on this are definitely want to focus.
Okay. I didn't know whether.
Rep. Compton?
Yeah, does this cover like, I know there was last, like text messaging. Is there somewhere in there that covers that if it's
If you could identify the
like by a
person
bot?
that's sending it out, yes, it would fall into this. I don't know how that's done,
Okay,
but I'm sure Attorney Sagal might have at least a suggestion of how to do that. But yeah, that would at least be the intent here. Maybe it's not specifically called for, but you could add that to the bill.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator. We're gonna chat a lot more on this one, I feel. Council,
Yes.
come on in.
Rick Sagal, Office of Legislative Counsel. Thank you for finally inviting me to your committee. I've been waiting all session long, and you gotta wait till crossover after crossover? Bring me in,
We wanted to pace
Chair
ourselves.
Byron,
Yes.
and your new room. This is interesting. Like the calming wall, paint colored. That's funny. Senator Collmore did a great job of walking through the bill. And by the way, I know most of you all, if I haven't met you all yet, it's good to meet you. My portfolio will find my way in here occasionally. This is more of an IT AI thing, which is fortunately or unfortunately my portfolio. I'm leaning towards unfortunately this session. So
Day-to-day.
so Tim and I, Tim Devlin, he and I do kind of share this one, but it's probably 90% me, and then he may take on that last section I'll talk about here in a second. You got a really great walkthrough by Senator Collmore. I'm glad to answer questions. I know you all had some for him. There was a question about the text messages from you, sir, and that would be considered publishing a deceptive, so that would be covered. And like the senator said, it'd be the person that sent out the text message, AT&T, T-Mobile, that your phone, your Apple, Google would not be reliable, just be the content producer of that message.
Okay.
So I mean, he walked through the bill.
Yeah, he basically.
He did.
He was excited. It was like.
He did a great job. And I was listening to make sure. I will kind of flag a couple things. The definitions are really important here, right? Because we keep referring to deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media. So we have a definition of what deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media is important. Then we have a definition of what synthetic media is. So keep in mind that it's narrow in some ways in that it has to be a ad of an individual saying or doing something. And it can be based on an election, on issues, like the senator said. It could be a town meeting election, issue-based election, or it could be a big presidential election where you have candidate versus candidate. But budgetary elections are also part of the coverage in this bill. He mentioned the First Amendment. I think he mentioned the First Amendment issues, the ban. I did strongly suggest the committee not ban these ads, because whenever you just ban a person from being able to publish something, the First Amendment comes up, and you got to have really good reason to tell someone they can't say something. And this is a pretty good reason, right? You don't want to deceive voters. You don't want to have them make a ill-informed decision on an election. However, Texas did ban these back in, I think, 2019, one of the first states to, and theirs was thrown out because it was too broad. So you maybe could do it if you found a way to narrowly regulate the speech, but I think it's a very, very tightrope you'd have to walk. This is also, by the way, this is also gonna be a tightrope because you're regulating speech. You're requiring they put a disclosure. Imagine if you sold, give a hypothetical here. Let's say you're in the business of selling. I haven't thought about this thoroughly, so. Used cars, okay? And when you made an advertisement, either a website ad or a TV ad, radio ad, you had to say in your disclosure something about how your message may not be true, right? Because you're a sales pitch, it's a sales pitch. We don't require that. We don't require commercials to say, this may not be a true accurate representation of what you're selling. But there are some exemptions in the pharmaceutical fields. You may see all the side effects of drugs in those commercials. So we do have some examples of this to protect consumers. So this is possible, but it's just a tightrope. I just want to let you all know about that.
Hands. Representative Hoover of Burlington, then Nugent.
So in the past, I recall seeing let's use Bernie as an example with hair going all over the place and his actual words playing in the background. The perception is that this is kind of a wild guy making these things, or get a nice colored picture of one candidate in a black and white. Was he, did they approach him in this area or
So,
went to the last section on page or first section of page 2?
yeah, so, would that media had been created by some kind of synthetic, is it created using some kind of AI software, right? To make the candidate appear to be authentically saying something or doing something they didn't do? Would it provide a reasonable person with a fundamentally different understanding or impression of the appearance, speech, conduct of the candidate? So if someone does claim that, the court would have to look at the ad and determine, is this actually synthetic media that required a disclosure? Okay.
I'm just curious, is this, I guess like the First Amendment question, if it's artificial intelligence, like, is there an evolving definition of speech from artificial intelligence? Like, how can we define it?
The founders were ready for AI. They had no idea AI was. It's a good question, and it's something the, Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, the courts have tried to maintain the same level of protection while our technology increases, especially with the Fourth Amendment, like police issues come into courts often. So as far as the First Amendment and technology, that is even newer, especially with the ability to publish whenever you want, whatever you want online. Used to be that you had to own a printing press or some kind of newspaper to publish things that people could read or watch. So to answer your question, the courts have grappled with this and they're going to continue to, but the principles remain the same, that you generally have the freedom to say, publish what you want. Like that's, the goal of the First Amendment. Governments can regulate it narrowly, and it's case by case basis as to.
So you're assuming, so it's still in some way regulated because the person is like initiating the speech through an AI tool. It's not like the AI is just like making the speech. That's why it has.
Right. So a person, correct. A person is controlling the means of that production. Right.
All right, thank you very much, council.
Sure.
We are gonna shift gears now, and that's, wow, we went ahead of schedule, behind schedule, right on schedule. We're hitting all our schedules. That wasn't, just ball. Yeah. Thank you for voting confidence, Bethany. I like that.
It's
Yeah.
probably gangs organizations.
I think when you have a goal out there, it works itself out.
All right. We are shifting gears now, folks, to another instance of amendment on H 474, our elections bill. We have here again today, Representative Sevilla, the presenter of the amendment, with an adaptation of the one we discussed yesterday. Yes, please join us.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Representative Hedrick joined me as well.
please. Yeah. I did. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you hiding over there.
I don't know if Representative Donahue is coming or not. Thank you for giving us a moment. We have come back with a different amendment with a revised timeline, as I had testified originally, open to any day after the primaries that would work. This puts it at 6 days after talking briefly with folks from the Secretary of State's office yesterday, understanding they need time for curing of I think it's the petitions and validating them. This puts us within the window that the parties have for appointing and getting the general election ballot out. So we would like to see that same consideration for independence and move this from 14 to 6 days. I think it's that simple. I don't know if Representative Petrick, you have anything else to say at this point?
I mean, I'm coming at this just from a fundamental philosophical core belief that an independent candidate, and I can say this, I mean, I haven't been an independent candidate for very long. So I've never gone through an election cycle as an independent candidate. But I do think that there's a fundamental core value in having the information provided by the primary system to determine if an independent candidate would want to enter the race. I don't think that's an unfair component of our election cycle at all. I read very briefly the Secretary of State's concerns, and I don't discount the administrative hardship that accompanies this. I don't think that's how we should make our decisions about how candidates have access into the process if they are an unaffiliated candidate. So for me, there's just a fundamental core belief that we have the right, Vermonters, constituents have the right to gauge the political landscape that is created by the primary system for the parties to make a determination as to whether or not more candidacy is required.
Representative Waters Evans.
Right. So currently, independent candidates file to run after the independent candidate deadline is after the deadline to file as a party candidate in a primary. Correct? So my question is, what is the difference between an independent candidate knowing who's running? Let's say we have pink jelly beans and blue jelly beans and red jelly beans and green jelly beans are running against each other in two primaries. An independent candidate registers after they know who those four people are who are running. So what is the difference between knowing who the four people are who are running versus knowing who won? Let's say pink and red won. And what is the difference then between knowing, oh, now I want to run because the person I didn't like or the person I don't support won the primary. Do you see where, like?
I think you just said it.
Yeah.
I might be really okay with how the primary process the results of the primary process. I might be okay to the fact that I don't feel a need to run because I really trust the fact that the blue jelly bean won. As to Representative Sebelia's point on the floor yesterday, primary process really does serve the potential of the more extreme candidates getting through the process.
Right.
Especially in today's political climate, right? So if blue-green are running in primary A, and I'm comfortable with the blue candidate and not the green candidate, and the green candidate wins, I think democracy is served by having that opportunity, 6 days in this case, to say, you know what? It's time. It's time for me to step in.
I guess my question is then, if it's democracy and we're talking about the will of the voters and the voters have chosen two primary candidates. The sticking point for me is I don't understand why an independent candidate needs to know who won versus needs to know who's running. Because when you're filing, you already know, not you specifically, but one already knows who those primary candidates are. And that there is a chance that the people who are voting, who are exercising their right to vote, are the ones who are going to be choosing which candidates run in that primary. When you already have that information as an independent candidate, you can still run for office. You can file your petition And then based on who wins the election, the primary elections, you can withdraw your candidacy if you're satisfied with who those people are. That's where I get stuck, because you already have all of the information about who could and again, not you two specifically, but just one in general, already has that information about who's running.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying?
I understand your point.
Yeah.
I absolutely understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I agree with closing the door at the same point that you do.
Representative Waters Evans, is there any way that a partisan candidate who did not participate in the primary is able to participate in the general election? Do the parties have the ability to nominate anyone past the primaries?
Currently, they do, yes.
Yes, okay. That is my point.
Representative Stone.
Hi, I was wondering if you talked with the Secretary of State or looked into how this would impact the UOCAVA deadlines for overseas voters in particular.
I understand that is being, that is not a place, I'm just gonna be really clear, that folks want to go with me. Okay, so I understand that we put these in place, that we shifted timelines to make sure that we could get ballots overseas. For service personnel. So, and I have family that I, want to be able to vote. It's important that they are able to vote. I would also, coming from a military family, note that when we give the military a task of upholding our democracy, they don't have the option of saying, that's too hard, or I don't have enough time. And so the question that I've been pursuing is, I'd like to hear from the Secretary of State's office, what do they need in order to get this job done? And they have started to provide that information. I don't think that it's realistic to hire a 5-week limited service person. But I appreciate that we're starting to think about solutions. So thanks. You're welcome.
Yes, Representative Mango.
Actually, I just would like a clarification because yesterday I think I spoke on the House floor. What I said was not exactly correct. So I just wanted to clarify, when you first came in this morning and presented your amendment, you said that you would be open to any date after the primary election. And I apologize on the House floor that I said that I understood differently. So I just wanted that to be clear to folks that Representative Sibilia is open to any date.
Thank you, Representative Hango. I appreciate you saying that on record.
Okay, I want to hear from Secretary of State's office because Representative Sibilia brought up a resource conversation. One of my biggest concerns with this is the testimony that we had taken about the number of independent candidates that could be captured within this, or just that they have to process. The number was about 50 to 70, right? And if we compress the timeline for the ballot execution for ballots, all of those things, here we are, where we have a provision in this bill where we're working towards an audit because of an issue with an election with Benning won. I am struggling with doing something that stresses the same sort of resource structure with ballot execution after the fact on the primary. With this piece, I see these two pieces being sort of like almost functionally and philosophically within conflict with one another in this moment in time, because we're over here trying to solve this from the Bennington one conversation. So tightening the timeline for the execution, that same mechanism, in a way that would stress human resources in a way that could instigate or initiate an error, I am very much struggling with. I just wanted to say that out loud to the table because that's where I am at internally. Please.
Mr. Chair, I think I appreciate that concern. I appreciate the committee's attention to that. I think that's really important. It brings up a question for me of, does the Secretary of State's office have enough resources when it comes to elections? And so maybe that is that's the conversation to have, as opposed to what can we afford to do in terms of democracy and fairness.
Representative Hoover, Burlington.
I expressed the same sort of concern that the chair does. We do have the resources that we need because we get elections done. But that's assuming that all pieces of the puzzle are present and working. And we have no bench to speak of. And does our ballot printer have a bench to speak of? I just am uncomfortable with the idea that we're running things so tight that one stumble and we've got a major problem. That's sort of my word.
Anything else for the presenters of the amendment? No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please join us.
Another chair as well?
Oh, yeah, let's.
I'll sit on this one.
Okay. You get your name tags on some chairs.
Good morning. For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State, and I have with me.
Sean Sheehan, Elections Director.
I think I did provide filed testimony and I'm happy to walk through it, but I would really like to talk about Representative Sepilia's question to me yesterday about what we would need and respond to that directly. Yesterday afternoon, I said that we would absolutely need another staff person for a period of time. Thinking through that very quickly again in like a 10-minute telephone call. I think that would need to be at a bottom line, someone who's with us for 5 weeks. That would be a limited services position. That's the type of position that would be in our state system. And we would need a general fund allocation to support that. That is not built into our budget this year. That would come at a cost. We did not foresee that cost. And because we didn't provide that in our budget bill to the governor, we would need a general fund allocation. I'm concerned even with that because finding someone, training them, recruiting them from someone who would take a 5-week limited services position, I'm concerned about the skill set. And I really want to respond to something that I heard on the floor, which is that this is administrative. This work is not administrative. This work is highly technical. Elections are highly technical. They're technical for our team. They're technical for town clerks. This is not, a widget thing. This is a lot of proofreading. This is a lot of verification. This is communication with town clerks. This is communication with our tabulator company. This is communication with our printing company. It's considerable back and forth, and with our accessible ballot and overseas voting electronic delivery company. So we are dealing with 3 different vendors plus our town clerks to make sure that the ballots are functional, will get to voters to the correct voter at the right time and be able to be read in our tabulators. It's really essential. I think, so reflecting on that overnight and talking with the team today, if this is something that is a priority to the body to reverse the decision that was made previously, which was made because of UOCAVA, the importance of getting these ballots overseas to our military members and our voters who are not military members, but choose to live overseas, and they have as much right to vote as well. Then we made that decision as a state to move the independent filing deadline up because that was the priority. And I guarantee you, after looking at this from every angle possible, that compromise was made and put at the very last date it was functional because of the concern that independent candidates should be able to file until the last moment. If this is a priority that independent candidates can vote after the primary, then our office really needs to engage on a much larger conversation about moving the primary up. And that is a big conversation. That would be moving the primary deadlines and all the petition deadlines. But we're willing to engage on that. That would give us even more time to prepare for the universal vote by mail, but we cannot compromise on putting this after the primary. We can move the primary date. That is something that is within this body's control. But it would change when petitions need to be filed. It would change quite a few things. And that's not something that we can do in a matter of days.
Representative Pistol.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the primary used to be in September.
That's right.
And we moved it back in August because there was a race at one point that recount or something.
It was because of the UOCAVA Act and the
We
MOVE
didn't have
Act.
time to get our ballots back.
That's correct.
Get them overseas.
Because if there's a runoff race or if there's any problem with that race, we cannot get our ballots.
Reading something, it's gone back a few years, several years, but anyways, then we moved it back to August.
So
It's been working fine.
yeah, our primary is as late as it can be in the cycle because my understanding was it was a priority of the legislature at the time that these decisions were made, that petitions to run were able to be filed after this body was released. So if we moved the primary to up earlier, that would work for our office, but the impacts on Vermonters' ability to vote in the middle of the summer should be taken into consideration. And the ability for people to run while they're also actively serving in the legislature should be taken into consideration. But all of those things are movable and within our control, just not today.
Rep Hooper of Randolph.
I agree with you. It seems to me it would be a pretty major conversation to talk about moving that date again. What would that look like? I mean, would we have to consider the first Tuesday after the first Monday of the month prior?
I don't think there's any rule that it has to be on the first Tuesday. I think we could put it on the third Tuesday of July. But it's just, I don't think you would change the law to say that.
But
Your restructuring of our current electoral calendar. Representative Waters Evans.
What happens if you miss? Let's say worst case scenario,
Yeah.
a ballot's printed wrong, the mail is delayed, whatever happens, the printing machine breaks down, we lose all the stamps. What is the consequence if we miss those UOCAVA deadlines and the universal vote by mail deadlines?
The most plain way to say it is we disenfranchise a set of voters. We make it so that voters are not able to participate in our election. Of course, there's other ramifications. It's extremely stressful for our team. We have to scramble and figure that out. There would be a cost to reprinting ballots if that's what's required. There would be a cost to remailing ballots. We would have to, if there was an entire batch of voters in Vermont that did not get their ballots on time or got the incorrect ballots and we knew about it, I think we'd want to seek an executive order from the governor or something that will allow us to do electronic delivery of ballots to those voters. I think if the ramifications are high. We haven't really had to encounter that in a way that hasn't been fixable. But the bottom line, the trickle down is there's a voter who does not have the opportunity to vote. And that is really important to our office. That's sort of why we exist. So.
I'll just say as a town clerk too, we do have every town has those voters that want that ballot the day they're available, that 45-day window, especially in August because they're traveling, they're going on vacation. A lot of our winter birds are headed back to Florida after Labor Day, or so they want to get their ballot in before they head down. I mean, so I just think there's a lot of people that call you like January 1st and say, make sure you get my ballots this year. It's been the system for the year, so I think.
I don't believe that we counted the number of calls that we received at that 45-day window, but we did have a considerable amount of clerks contacting us and voters saying, where is my ballot? And we were instructing people, and it's good for everyone to know, you can track your ballot on your My Voter page. So you can see when your ballot was mailed and you can anticipate delivery based on when it was mailed. But we have that functionality because people are sitting and waiting for their ballots, even if they're not overseas voters. If they're in, Northfield, they would like their ballot. So voters are engaged and are expecting their ballots. early.
A lot of our messaging, we really just talked about postal service issues. A lot of our message really, well, these are the dates and statutes required, not for the Okava, but for all Vermonters to go out by October 1st. But that doesn't mean you're receiving it by October 1st. So, we know clerks all over the state were getting calls on October 2nd. Well, yeah, we're trying to reinforce those talking points. Several days in this thing.
Okay, so Hooper, Burlington, then Stone.
This is a inane sort of question. Moving towards computer degree, but what are we using now for international and overseas?
We have the ability,
service?
we can mail, but we also have the ability to send the ballot electronically.
A specific carrier that.
The United States Post Office.
That seems to be a problem.
That is what we have.
Rep Stone.
You said something and I just want to go back to it. You said this work is not administrative, it's highly technical. So what I'm gathering from that is even if you had 2 more people, this work would still be highly technical. And some of the challenges that you're speaking of would still be challenges just because of the number of other people that you're dealing with. That's summarizing kind of what I've.
It is, it's very technical. And even the concept, let me just say, I think it was good that I had the opportunity to speak with Representative Sebelius yesterday. And I was trying to figure out how to solve this problem because as an office, we really like to try to get to be able to accommodate as many people as possible. Of course, we want democracy to be served well. That is our underlying principle too. Do we need more staff in the elections team? That's something that we have debated. That's something that we may come to this body and say, yes, we do, particularly with the conversation that we just had in House Education on setting up these new school districts and the new administrative work that will take both for town clerks and for our office. I know this committee's heard a lot from us on this. If that bill moves, we may be asking for another position. That has a budget impact for us on whole. But that would be a more sustainable model than having someone come in for 5 weeks.
Who are you hiring?
Who will you hire? What is their skill set? It takes time to hire. It takes time to train. It takes time to oversee someone who you only have for 5 weeks. I'm really concerned about the
onboarding that person or that role, not the same person, right? You have to rinse, repeat the training process of a new person every time. They have the lack of consistency there.
The lack of consistency is really a problem. And you guys have seen Title 17. It's not an easy chapter to understand. And the work that this person would be doing is answering all the questions for independent candidates on how they get their petitions filed. I find it difficult to understand how an independent candidate could gather the requisite signatures in 1 day, 5 days, or 6 days, or 12 days even, when some of our statewide candidates, that takes time to gather the signatures. Then we'd have all those host of questions on election day and the day after. Election day, I just want to emphasize, and Sean's here to talk about it if you folks have questions, the amount of time that our staff is working. On election day, we are there, myself included, but the election team is there from 7 o'clock in the morning until this primary, 11:30 at night. That is our standard of Yeah, our town clerks are in the same place. We're there because the town clerks are there, and that's what we're doing. Because we need to be able to answer questions about, we have a non-functioning toilet in our town hall. We have to move our polling location. There have been instances. Sorry, my dyslexia just went in.
I did that yesterday.
Instances where we've had our election staff go out and help the town clerk move a polling location. We have had instances, second time's a charm, where we have had to deal with active threats at a polling location and coordinating with law enforcement. We really have to be 100% available, 100% there all the way through every town putting in their election night results. That work that work starts the Friday and Monday before the election, helping town clerks print their tally sheets, their voter checklists. Those are some of the concerns that we have about the write-in candidacy timeline. That's a really crunchy time too. Then, which we'll work on. Then, getting the polling location set up. These need to be accessible. What does that mean? We have to help town clerks understand that. Then the election happens, and then town clerks are sort of providing the official return of votes, which is different than the election night results. And that is a different process that we help the town clerks and the BCAs. They have 48 hours to do that. We are working late hours that night to help them do that. So then we're on Thursday, post-election, and the town clerks have put in their official return of results. Then we're helping the parties and our office certify the results. That requires looking at all those official returns and creating massive reports that are very public and need to be reviewed by the local committees and the state committees. So this is a very, very busy time for our team. And it's not like that every day in elections. So can we justify a seventh member of our team every day of every year? We've figured out this workflow as close as we can. We pay people overtime, we feed them, we have dance parties. I mean, we try and make it as fun as we can. But we get through that time. If we have additional work that's added, particularly with the school redistricting, we're going to need another position. And that gives us some flexibility here as well. But again, that's not a conversation that I understand we're ready to have today either.
It's a much larger conversation as a result of this.
Yeah.
What the impact of this would do to all of that is so unknown. Representative Zone.
I was just gonna add to that dance party, and then after you're district clerk, then you've got to convene on Friday.
Right.
To do your district reporting, and then your participation reporting. So we always have put the election to bed and rest party, because like, oh my gosh, we're finally done with this election, let's.
Right, and we need to be available as a team to answer any of your questions up until then. And then people can put in petitions for recount. We need to be helpful for candidates who want a recount. Sometimes that can be a very complicated process for candidates and for town clerks to help figure out. It suddenly involves Superior Court, which is a place where none of us have been before. So, it's the timeframe's really tight, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of deadlines for us.
We get audited.
And then we get audited.
And the week following, I think it's then Thursday to Friday before you have the representative district canvass, the Senate and county district canvass. The following Tuesday, you have the statewide canvass. The team pulls together there. And I just, one thing I wanted to say, I think, is Deputy Secretary Hibbert alluded to, just with the number of hours both the town clerks and BCA put in and my team. I think there's been kind of a undertone, I think broader across the country, but I've heard a little bit yesterday too, kind of implying that public servants want to, punch out at their 8 hours and not work beyond that. Just that it's not just the side of election day working the 18 hours and the long nights after that. But also I think there's the understanding when you do the highly technical work, you're more prone to have errors if you try to do everything and that push an 18-hour. That's the reason why you don't have the election night report separate from the official return of votes, because I'm sure public servants would be willing to work 20 hours instead of 18 to be done and have that dance party sooner. But that when you look at it with fresh eyes after a few hours sleep, you're more likely to be confident that you didn't make an error. And so I think that extends over the full couple week process and the way things are filled at that slate, doing that technical work, wanting to make sure that capacity is right to be as error-free as possible.
Anything else from folks?
I'm just gonna throw this out there. Would you accept a deadline of one day after the primary, the next day after?
I really can't say yes. And I feel like I want to say yes because I understand to an extent the objective, although I agree with Representative Evans that, we currently allow independent candidates to file and then withdraw. And I think that does preserve their right to join the race and choose to withdraw from the race. Is it perfect? Possibly not. But the way to get to perfect is moving the primary date and to not put more pressure in those days post-primary in our current timeline. We cannot really accept any more work during that crunch. And as it is, it's the Thursday, just for context, it's the Thursday before our busiest week that we need to verify 100 signatures, 500 signatures, or 50 signatures for candidates, for independent candidates that could file up until the last date. On our filed testimony, we did do some research into the last election on when independent candidates filed. Representative Sibilia asked me to do that. Sean graciously did that for the last election. We couldn't get it together for all 3 of the last elections, but we did it for the last one. And you can see that we are getting filings on the last date, but we also are getting them throughout the entire period. And in fact, the most popular time is the last week of July. And I think that that gives us time to do that 72 hours. The law currently says 72 hours. We're asking for 2 business days because 72 hours, as you heard us testify, puts us reviewing signatures on Saturday. So our team is reviewing these independent candidate filings on Saturday and in order to comply with the law, because then we need to give people the time to cure. So with the change that is within the bill as drafted, we would have until Monday to do that final candidate if someone files on Thursday. We need that because we can't have our team working on Saturday when we're expecting them to work 18-hour days the next week. So it's just, I think it already is at the very last moment it can be. And I haven't gone back to watch the legislative testimony. It wasn't recorded. I'd have to go look at the filed testimony from when this change occurred, but I'm confident the discussion was, are we disenfranchising independent candidates? And I'm confident the conversation was, we have to, so that we can comply with UOCAVA and the MOVE Act. And we made the best compromise we could with that Thursday before the primary. And, sorry.
Sorry, I don't want to.
No,
I was just gonna, if I could add 2 points to that. I mean, in my mind, it's part of the question is what problem are we trying to solve if we move the deadline date to 1 day after the primary, number one, and number 2, just a clarification, thinking our filed testimony here. Actually, this past year, we didn't have anybody file on that final day, the Thursday, the August 8th, but the most popular day for filing was August 5th, the Monday of that week. And then that last week in July was also quite popular. Part of the communication and from talking to my team about that is that really there's a lot of back and forth. Candidates really didn't want to miss that, miss that deadline, do it wrong. They were checking, but really aiming for that deadline. Part of the issue, if you move it till after the primary, you're trying to set up a system of people can wait until after the primary and you're really incenting that day, whether it be the day after, 5 days after, whatever it is. I don't think the distribution curve from the past, when the world was you file prior to the primary and you have 15 and a half weeks from April 22nd until August 8th this year to file, whereas, party candidates have the 5.5 weeks on that. So you have the 15 and a half weeks, the distribution, they kind of largely hit that week and a half before, make sure they're not right up against the deadline, but close. You push it past the primary, it kind of changes the calculus in folks' minds. But back to the issue of what problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to say somebody wants to see the result of the election before they do all that work and get all those petition signatures, if you move it 1 day after the election and you have to file by Wednesday afternoon, I don't think people are really going to be looking at the results at late Tuesday night or first thing Wednesday morning, running out and getting 50, 100, 500 signatures. And if they've done the work to collect all of those, is it just a matter of, at that point, I think this has been discussed many times, if you file it, if you like the candidate who's on there, you withdraw, you have the same right as everyone else. So I think if we're looking at where we're pinching, and if they do come in that day, again, we're talking about the busiest days of the year, on our calendar, day after working the 18 hour. The day we are helping people official return of boats and jumping right into with the canvas, that day after.
Thank you for those answers. I just asked that because Representative Sibilia had said she would accept anything up to one day after the primary. Just out of curiosity, I'm looking at the chart you provided for us and her name does not appear on this chart.
It
So,
does, it's on the,
sorry?
oh, I'm sorry. I'm wondering if our file doesn't show it, but
Not on the
Um,
first page, that
it's on
it
the-
continues on to the next. page.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
okay.
multiple pages of names.
I've got 2 pages and I don't see it, so I was just
Oh.
curious how you track that.
I wonder if it got cut off. I was,
Oh, it must have gotten cut off on the electronic version. Okay.
I can update that. I was running to House Education.
Just curious, if I was missing something.
Nope, I
It's
was,
another.
I can get that updated.
Okay, great. Thanks for your answers. Appreciate that.
Anything else from the table for the secretary?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I just want to see if there's any discussion from the table right now on this. Representative Waters Evans.
I think it's pretty clear that any days, as we've heard multiple times in testimony, any days after a primary filing deadline are not acceptable or doable for the Secretary of State's office. And I think the risk to voters and their votes being counted is simply too high to move this afterward through no fault of the Secretary of State's office, just through the actual logistics of time and running elections. And if the whole point is to make sure that voters can vote, then putting that at greater risk does not seem in any way acceptable to me.
Second from Representative Burlington on that one. Okay. Representative Pistol.
I just can't imagine going through the whole process of changing the primary date.
Oh,
Early
no.
into summer.
Yeah,
Just,
no.
It wasn't well received. We had to move it September to August, and I can't imagine what it'd be to August or July.
And I think also like one point I want to raise within the context of this conversation is also the staff strain, the staff concerns, like where do you find this position? How do you confidently staff it every 2 years, X, Y, and Z, right? Like I understand where they're coming from is like a mindset and a philosophical approach, but we got to look at the raw mechanisms of the operations of an election cycle.
And I think it's important every time you say that to talk about how technical it is. It's not like just saying, like at the hospital, we're short staffed. I can't just bring Lucy in to perform brain surgery.
Right.
You need a
Sorry.
specific person who can perform a specific type of task. So what I'm hearing now is we just need to like really hone in. If we're saying, oh, it's because of administrative positions, it's not like just Joe Schmo off the street. Like it has to be a very technically trained person because if there are mistakes, it really impacts voters and democracy. So I just want to keep talking about technicality of these positions.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna put it, it's, but the candidate has to take some ownership of this too as well. They're interested in being the candidate. You don't wait until the final day of filing. You get your petition in to make sure you have the proper signatures. I don't know of any candidate, any race that I've ever had people bring me, but they never wait till the last day. And I always encourage them. Don't wait, if you get a full sheet, just bring me the sheet and I'll verify the sheet as we go along throughout the election season. So I think the candidate has to take some ownership of this as well and not wait. Got plenty of time.
Red Pango.
One question, which I can't remember the answer to. What was the date of the primary last year?
It's always the first Tuesday of August.
I think it was August the.
What I thought.
First. So it would have been like the sixth.
That's the first Tuesday.
It was
the second.
It's the
Is it the
second.
second? Sorry.
It was the
I
13th.
guess I would ask the
13th.
Secretary of State's office
defer to
that, please.
I'm looking it up currently.
Thank you.
Never forget
I appreciate that.
It was the 13th.
It was.
Yeah.
The 13th.
13th, thank you. So second
13th.
Tuesday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna write that down so I don't forget it again.
Alright. So. Any other comment? No. Alright, well, I mean, I really fundamentally don't think anything changed within the day structure from yesterday's proposal to today. I personally think we've received more information that actually makes me less enthusiastic about these concepts. So I'm going to move that we find the Sibilia et al. Amendment unfavorable. Thumbs up or unfavorable.
Do you have a question?
Oh, did you?
No, I'm just trying to wrap my head around something in my own mind.
Okay, gotcha.
Nothing about this.
All right, so at thumbs,
Nothing about this.
Jay, you have that?
Unfavorable.
unfavorable. Yes, we're at unfavorable. That is an 11-0-0 unfavorable to Sibilia et al. Thank you, committee. That was a robust morning that we just ran a gauntlet on a broad scope of subject matter. We got a lot on the floor today. I believe we have a third reading on this. And then we have 3 second readings. Which is scheduled correctly. So we've got a vigorous day on the floor.